Hello and welcome aboard the Talkin Texans podcast. I'm Paul Gallant, host of the Paul Gallant Show, which you can hear weekdays 10 to noon Central on ESPN 97.5 and 92.5. Check out some clips from the show right here on this YouTube channel. And he is DJ Bien-Aime, the Houston Texans beat writer for ESPN. DJ, we had two Texans joint practices against the Miami Dolphins before their game Saturday, preseason game number 2 against those Miami Dolphins. First question, you have been boots on the ground as Houston has broken the record for consecutive days of 100-plus degree heat, which is saying something. How would you grade the Texans based off of these 2 days?
How I grade the Texans based off these 2 days, I would say let's start offense. I'll give them like a C. C is C minus. Yeah, it's gonna be working in progress throughout the year. I think we all knew that though, but I think that the combination of still looking for legitimate dynamic piece on a perimeter at receiver pair with a rookie quarterback kind of is gonna have moments where the offense kind of sputters a lot. And you kind of saw that even through both days where the offense was sputter. I think yesterday CJ was a little on Wednesday. CJ was fine. He had some good moments, mainly in the red zone, but in between the 20s, it was a struggle bus. I think that had a combination to do with not being able to quickly decipher Big Fangio's defense, which is normal. Like he's a rookie. Like Big Fangio is one of the best DCs ever. Pair that with the fact that the receivers necessarily didn't get him enough easy throws, right? Like it's not like they weren't open at times, but for a guy going against that type of defense, you need sometimes it helps if you have a dynamic weapon that can create massive separation. So it could be easy pitch and catches for CJ against a defense like that. I think the front, you see a little bit on the offensive line, the missing of having Titus Howard, and that's to be expected because Titus Howard is a very good right tackle. So, and we all know when you have drop off on the offensive line, the backup usually isn't going to be close to the starter, unless like the starter also stinks. But that's the only exception. So there were times where CJ was under pressure, but there's also times where he was kind of holding the ball and the pocket was collapsing. Obviously, Wednesday was a little better. Thursday, I don't think he didn't throw a touchdown pass. Like he didn't have many explosive plays, if any at all, on Thursday. Which is again, it is what it is. Jordan practices first year, first time going against that type of defense that has difference makers on the front end and the back end. And on defense, I would say the grade for them, I would say B to B plus.
Okay.
Yeah, I say B to B plus. Like B plus was yesterday, was Wednesday. You know, a lot. It's weird because I don't know how much stock I want to put into red zone touchdowns allowed because it's a lot easier to score touchdowns during team in the red zone during camp, right? You can't hit the players for real. You can't hit the quarterback. So like it's easier to get to thread the needle versus in the red zone during the season. So I don't know how much to take off of that. But again, seeing how Jalen Petrie ended the practice yesterday was a very encouraging sign, right? That shows that he's gonna be a playmaker this year. Jimmy Ward was making plays. Stingley had a few pass breakups on both days. Same with Steven Nelson. So and then Christian Harris had a pick also on Wednesday. Thursday, it was fine. Also, I give more B because it's outside of the 2-minute drill. 2-minute drill, they're really good. Like the Dolphins did not move the ball well during 2-minute drill. They converted on some fourth downs, but the fact they got to a fourth down and it was a lot of Tua going 1, 2, 3 check down or 1, 2 check down because not because even because of pressure, because the coverage on the back end was what it was. But Tyreek Hill was during team 2-minute drills, right? So there's just a lot of context and nuance that went in during joint practice. There's just a lot going on. But I would say that on Thursday, the defense did allow a little bit more big plays. Like there was one, the Braxton Berrios, deep down the middle of the field for like a massive gain from Tua. But again, like I would still say B because again, that 2 minute drive was exceptional. So I'll give him credit for that.
Okay, so C to C minus for offense and B to B plus for defense. To recap all of that, and as we always do, let's start with specifics. We got to start with CJ Stroud. Now, DJ, based off of what I was reading online, it's obviously a lot different to see what is reported, what is tweeted about. It's essentially what we are going off of versus what you saw. Based off of what I was reading online, sounded like Wednesday was good. Thursday, not so much. And I heard from you just a moment ago. Everyone just did. It's more of a mixed bag for him. I know you had mentioned going into these joint practices that you were curious to see how quickly he can operate against a Vic Fangio scheme. You said a
Mhm.
moment ago, like, hey, the wide receivers had a tough time. That was to be expected. These wide receivers are not particularly skilled, at least in the grand scheme of things. You're not picking them very high in a fantasy football draft. The Dolphins secondary, even without Jalen Ramsey, is one of the best in the league. So there was definitely an obstacle from that perspective, from a Titus Howard perspective as well. That offensive line going up against one of the better defensive lines in the NFL. When we talk about Stroud, we're looking for more quickness, and against a Vic Fangio defense, did you see that quickness, or was it a lot of hesitation, as you were talking about a little bit earlier?
Yeah, like people, I'm not really sure if people will get this notion that he had a good day on Wednesday. He did not. He had a fine day, but a good day. I would like again. You have to take the red zone with a little bit of grain of salt because some of those plays were heavily extended because the first and second read weren't open. They're trying to create it a little bit, which is fine. But good day, I wouldn't categorize
Okay.
that as a good day. Not even close. I don't even think he would categorize that as a good day because again, like for the entire offense. Like there were plays where he was getting sacked, plays where he was getting pressured, plays where he's holding the ball for a while, and that was you had more of that on Thursday, and again, it was worse than Wednesday because he threw a pick, had more sacks, and again, it was for me it was the 20s between 20s. That movement, there just wasn't enough consistency there. The red zone, if you starting on the red zone, a lot of quarterbacks can operate there because again, it's the red zone. Like you right there, you all you need is for the most part. If you're at the 20 yard, all you need is 20 yards. If you're inside the red zone, say on the 15, 10, all you need is 10 yards. That's a lot easier than moving the ball between the 20s because um, that's where you can't get into the red zone without moving the ball well in between the 20s. You can be a really good red zone offense, but if you stink in between the 20s, good luck.
Yeah.
So but to answer your original question, it was just again like a lot of not enough decisiveness. But again, he's a rookie, and like that's to be expected. And on top of that, like you have to tip your hat to the Dolphins defense. Like they have a good front, and then they have some playmakers on the back end. So defense gets paid to make plays too. So I don't think it's a red flag or oh my God, CJ didn't look great against the Miami Dolphins or Big Fangio led defense. The sky's falling. I wouldn't say that. I would just say that this was kind of what was to be expected. In all honesty,
You have a lot of familiarity with the Dolphins, and you're mentioning Vic Fangio, and Fangio is very respected across the NFL as a defensive mind. What specifically, I guess, does Vic Fangio's defense present as a challenge for all quarterbacks, specifically CJ Stroud?
they make everything look. He tries to make everything look the same. Now a lot of DCs do the same, try to do that, but he can make the what his disguises with the shells on the back end with the safeties. Because a lot of quarterbacks they try to determine what defense somebody's in based off of what the safeties are doing. All right, and you'll see motion, things like that to try to get a tell. But Vic does a really good job of teaching his defense to not show what exactly they're going to be in. So it can look like it could be cover four, and they could drop down to cover two, or it could look like it could be cover four, and it could be cover three, or it could look like it could be cover two, but it might end up just being some variation of quarter half, cover six, or whatever. So I would say that's part what makes him really good because he can confuse quarterbacks without having to blitz, and that's probably his hallmark. He doesn't want to blitz because he wants to have as many people in coverage because he knows if the quarterback has to hold the ball and if his first read isn't there, then now he's gonna hitch a little bit, and now there's a little bit of hesitation, and now that's when the front has to get to him. So again, that's why I'm not really knocking CJ for not being able to figure that defense out on the fly. Because again, he's a rookie. Like this is his what, third week of training camp practices. So like, you know,
All the things that you just mentioned and all of the other things that we touched on too, where the wide receivers are what they are and there are some missing parts on the offensive line, it does seem like it's a worst possible scenario for a couple of joint practices for a quarterback like CJ Stroud. So
right,
I like that you added that context there because I'm sure there will be some people with what they hear at first. They're like, oh my God, CJ, what the hell's going on here? But
right,
that's
right,
very
right,
good
right,
to
right.
hear. And I think these two practices are going to be extremely valuable for him because we all know that first off, you're just going up against more first stringers in a joint practice than you are going to be in a regular season game. Maybe the contact isn't 100% of what it would be in a regular season game. But I think the other thing is too, I doubt that Fangio is going to show those kind of exotic, difficult to
Right,
comprehend looks in a preseason game.
right. Yeah, no, exactly. I think, regardless of what we're discussing right now, I think he should have a productive preseason game because you're not going to see those confusing coverages that can make a quarterback kind of lose his mind a little bit or have a brain fart mentally. So I think it's going to be a lot more vanilla, just like with the Patriots, very vanilla, and then obviously the Texans will be a little more vanilla. So I would hope to see just be a little more, just be decisive, trust your eyes, let it fly, and he should be fine. So I'm not necessarily too worried about how he looks in the preseason game.
Quarterback competition is over, right? There's a viral clip of Eric Mangini saying, well, maybe you got to keep the competition going. And I read that, saw that, DJ, and I was like, well, clearly he hasn't been at training camp because from the sound of things, this thing has been wrapped. It just hasn't been an official announcement.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the chances of CJ starting the first two preseason games and not being a starter is virtually impossible. Like, doesn't make any sense, right? Like, it's been Davis hasn't had a rep with the one since the second day of joint practices. No, not second day of joint practices. Second day of training camp in pads. He hasn't had any reps with the
It's
one
been a while
since.
then.
It's been a while. Yeah, it's been a minute because that was back in like early August. That was like the first few days of August, and then that carried through an entire another week of preseason before a preseason game, and then now through a whole week of joint practices. Right. So yeah, I think. I mean, it's not official yet, but it will be official soon. So
Okay. Okay, good. I'm looking forward to just ending Mills Mafia once and for all. It's
yeah,
over.
yeah,
Go
it's over.
home.
Yeah, please, you don't gotta go home, but you gotta get the bleep out of here.
Thank you. Thank you. I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a lot about CJ Stroud there. What was your biggest non CJ Stroud related takeaway from what you've seen these two joint practices between the Texans and Dolphins?
That the Texans DBs still held up against the Dolphins receivers, even though like the Dolphins were without Jalen Waddle. Because what makes the Miami Dolphins offense so too much of a headache is that you have two guys that can legitimately break the game wide open. So I would say for sure, even though Waddle wasn't there, I still tip my hat to the Texans secondary because they was able to keep the passing attack in check for a decent amount of proportions. They're obviously Tua is a type of guy that can create big plays. He was like that at Bama. Obviously, his first couple years in the NFL, he didn't. That's because he didn't have the weapons. But when he has weapons, he's gonna be able to create stuff. Because there was a deep 40, 50-yard completion to Braxton Berrios. But Jalen and Jimmy weren't out there, and I think seeing what I saw these couple past days lets me know, even though again Waddle didn't practice, that the Texans secondary is still going to be a force this year. Again, no Jalen Waddle, so I get trying to temper the expectations and temper what I saw. But again, Tyreek was out there for large proportions, and Tyreek still got his because Tyreek is an all timer. But the Texas secondary was able to limit some of what the Miami Dolphins wanted to do. So for me, I would say that the Texans secondary continues to show me that they're going to be a top 5 unit. Well, not top 5 unit, I'll go top 10 unit. But a
Okay.
possibility being top 5, yeah.
Well, I'm going to go from that to a couple of things that you've tweeted because I feel like that links. You saw on Wednesday at the end of practice something you referred to a little bit earlier. Jalen Petrie, and you can see this online if you want to catch it yourself, just broke on a ball. It was one of those reads that was Palomalu-esque where the instincts there, you're like, holy
Yeah,
crap, that was an
right,
incredible play. So you
right.
mentioned a couple of things. If he's not a Pro Bowler this year, I'll be shocked. All Pro is on board. Hey, there's some pepper behind those takes. That play was very awesome to see. Is he, of all the guys in the secondary, the one that is shining the brightest?
The brightest? Nah, I don't think he's trying the brightest, but that just because secondary is just good. You know, it's hard for any of them to separate from each other because they're all extremely good. Like Jimmy has had a great camp. Jalen's had a phenomenal camp. I mean, he was sitting in cover four. I just read to his eyes, jumped that to the crib. Stingley, there was one play today where he was able to have a pass breakup on Chosen Anderson or Chosen Robbie, however he has it right now. Again, and then Steven Nelson, consummate pro, high end number two cornerback player. Like that unit, and again, Desmond King, I think had an interception today. Tavia Thomas, good player. Like that's why like when you ask me who shined the brightest, they all shining and they all bright. And if you stare into how bright that secondary is, you might go blind. So they've been good this camp. Like they've been really good. Like I know I came into it saying, oh, they can be like a top 10 unit, but now I'm solidified in that they will be a top 10 unit because again, Stingley's gonna take the next step. I've seen it. Now I've seen it just other teams. He's gonna take that next step. Steven Nelson had a very good year last year. Desmond King / Tavier Thomas are are exceptional cornerback, nickel cornerbacks. Jalen Petrie in year two, in a system that plays into his strengths, is only going to get better. And now he can kind of be more in that roaming vibe where he can read the quarterback and be able to make plays like off that. Because again, there'll be a lot of more quarter situations. And you have Jimmy Ward, who's the consummate pro. I'm shocked he's never made a Pro Bowl, but he's a very good player. So like, there's no weakness in the secondary. Like, there's no weakness in the secondary. So that's why I think there'll be a top 10 unit.
Derek Stingley, who you mentioned a moment ago, you also saw him, as you described, have a teach tape rep against Eric Izukanma. Explain why it was a teach tape rep. Also, go watch it online because it was pretty impressive.
I mean, he basically, Eric, he ran an out route, but he stemmed inside, and Derek didn't try to beat him inside. He could sense he was coming back outside, and when he came back outside, he was able to sink his hips and turn with him and run the route for him. Right, like he was in a position where he didn't overextend to try to protect the inside, but he sat on the hip and was waiting for him to come outside, and that's why he was able to run the route for him because he could tell that he was running back outside because Eric didn't sell it well enough to make Derek think he was going inside. So he could tell he was coming outside. And I think that just goes to tape study, film study, Derek knowing receiver alignments, Derek having high IQ, Derek having good ball skills. It was every single thing you can ask for. Good feet at the line, able to stay on the receiver's hip. When the receiver breaks out, even though he has to come through you, you're able to sink through it and undercut it and then intercept it. Because sometimes if a receiver's running out route and he goes inside, he'll try to swim move and go back over the top or go back under the undercut. But Derek didn't give him the option for either one of those. And then boom, interception.
Sounds like there was a little freakish agility involved there too.
Yeah. Derek is a freak athlete. Like I don't think people realize like his granddad played in the NFL and his dad, even though his dad didn't go to the NFL, his dad was drafted by the Philadelphia Phillies to play in his minor league to be a baseball player. So like,
Wow,
and obviously and his dad played arena football. So Derek has great DNA. Derek has great genes.
The secondary for this team, there's a lot to get excited about, and that's really been the consistent theme coming out of training camp. You've been highlighting it. You've been doing great work out there. I wanted to focus on another guy because he's just making me excited because he's starting scuffles at training camp practices between the Texans, and then he did it with the Dolphins. And even better, when he was asked about it, like, "Oh, is that just business as usual?" He was like, "Yeah, really don't like what I'm doing." Talking about Christian Harris, who had an interception of his own on Wednesday, and on top of that, just seems to be bringing a level of physicality to the defense that has been sorely lacking at that middle level.
Yeah. Christian Harris had a really good camp. He's had a really good camp. He's brought that physicality that you just alluded to that they didn't have prior. He's bringing the chirpiness. He's bringing the feistiness. Because again, like remember, like last year, they didn't have a single fight at practice during training camp. And
Oh,
throughout the first week and a half, yeah, boo. And then throughout the first week and a half, there was nothing. But the guy that's been starting a lot, Christian Harris. There's one play during on Thursday during joint practices where Christian Harris, he didn't tackle a guy to the ground, but he thumped the guy to the ground. Raheem Mostert and Raheem got up hot. And then again yesterday, and on Wednesday, you saw Christian Harris again trying to cause some issues. So
was it Jeff
yeah,
Wilson the other time?
I think so, something like that. But yeah, like Christian Harris is bringing that nastiness that you got to have on the defense. You got to have guys on the defense that have screws. If you don't, then your defense is going to stink.
Physicality, it's difficult to gauge, I would imagine, over 2 practices who brought more.
Mhm.
I got the sense, though, reading some of your reports, DJ, that the Texans have brought a level of physicality to these joint practices that maybe has been lacking, and I don't know if that's a reflection of D'Amico or guys like Christian Harris, but I've enjoyed reading that these have been very chippy practices against another team following very chippy practices in-house.
Yeah. I mean, Mike McDaniel today, he said that the Texans brought a level of energy that the Dolphins didn't match on that first day. So that, and I think that's what he's alluding to, the fact that Christian Harris, not Christian Harris specifically, but the fact that there was just more energy on the Texan side and more in creating more physical moments, right? Because all the skirmishes were started by the Texans. So I think that if that's the type of Christian Harris we're going to get this year, then the Texans should be very pleased with his development. And as I said before, he could be a Dre Greenlaw type of player that the Niners had alongside Fred Warner. Obviously, I can't say Christian Harris is going to be Fred Warner because Fred Warner, I think, is what we in 2023. Just, I don't know, he's one of the best linebackers I've ever seen in my life. And he's perfect for today's game, right? Like, he's perfect for he's like a perfect linebacker. So I can't compare Harris to him, but I can compare Harris to Dre Greenlaw, and I think he can have that type of impact at weak side linebacker.
That ain't bad to be.
No,
You mentioned earlier, let's shift to the other side of the football, some of the struggles the Texas wide receivers had against the defensive backs. And I think we have both been kind of feeling the same way on this, but you were the one that put it out on the mean streets of X. I think Dalton Schultz could end up leading the Texans in targets. Very good player. We know Schultz is top 10, borderline top 10 tight end in the NFL. We'll see how those rankings change by the end of the year. Is that more about Schultz and his skills, or is it more about Schultz and his skills compared to a wide receiver group that you mentioned had a difficult time getting separation?
I think I think two things can be true. I think the Texans wide receiving core still being a work in progress, paired with Dalton Schultz just being really good, is just the reality of the situation. I think that Dalton's just a really good player, and he's going to be CJ's safety blanket. And I think that early on in your career, you kind of need that guy over the middle that you can rely on. Because again, it's the easiest pass to get to someone, right? Like it's over the middle of the field. Like the ball doesn't have to travel that far, you know. And because when you throw it on the outside, I think the reason why people talk a lot about arm strength, it's not about how far you can throw it per se. It's more about how much velocity you can generate on that throw, how much torque you can put on that throw to make sure the ball gets there in a certain amount of time so the DBs can't undercut it. And CJ has more of a good enough arm to do stuff like that. But over the middle of the field, you don't necessarily even need all that. And if it's over the middle of the field, you might not have to read as long, and the ball can come out a lot quicker. And again, Dalton Schultz can make plays after the catch. So I think it's a combination of the fact that the receiving core is still a work in progress and has some questions. We'll see who's going to be number one guy. So when I say questions, I mean like who's going to be that number one guy for that receiver room. The tight end room, he's not going to have to compete with anybody for targets at the tight end spot. And coming based off of just what he's done recently, the only person that from a resume standpoint that can compare out of all the pass catchers is Robert Woods, and Robert Woods is coming off one of his worst years of his career. So we just have to kind of see what he rounds into 2 years removed from his injury.
You mentioned the figuring itself out in the wide receiver group. I know that on Wednesday, CJ Stroud and Tank Dell seemed to be in a rhythm. I think it was 3 touchdown passes that I read that
In
Stroud
red
threw
zone.
to Dell. Has Dell, based off of what we saw in these joint practices, based off of what we saw in preseason game number 1, has he worked his way into a higher part of the totem pole of Texans wide receivers?
Yeah, I think again, like I think right now the starters are Woods, Noah, Nico, but I think Tank Dell is knocking on that door. He's knocking on that door. So I think everybody outside of those three, everybody else is trying to fight to get into that starting role, and I think Tank is the only guy that is legitimately knocking on the door. You know, like he's making consistent making plays. Um, so yeah, I would say it's Tank, and again, he's the only receiver that made some legitimate plays in a preseason game. Granted, it was against the Patriots backups, but again, you got to make plays against somebody. You know what I'm saying? So we'll see. You know, we'll see if Tank is able to carve out a starting role and keep that starting role once the season gets here.
A plus use of a sound effect there. I gotta figure
Yeah,
I gotta find some sound effects of my own to just drop in here and just annoy them with you. Uh, the interior offensive line is where there's some young Texans. You got Kenyon Green at left guard. You got Juice Scruggs at center. And the Dolphins might be top to bottom the most talented roster in the NFL. I think the big obstacle in their way is Tua Tagovailoa's health, and that is a serious question with the concussions that he suffered last year. But when he's on, last year I think he proved that he's on. And to go back to one of the many units for the Dolphins that are good, their defensive line, one of
yeah,
one of many loaded units. So as a whole, I know the Texans' offensive line's without Titus Howard, but how did the line look to you specifically on the interior?
yeah. No, I mean, they were giving us some pressure. There's some plays where like the pocket was caving in on the interior on CJ. So I would say that there was some good and there was some we need to work on. So it was just a combination of both. It wasn't necessarily like they were getting took to the woodshed, but they weren't necessarily being road runners either. And
Mm,
again, you're right. The Dolphins' defensive line, they have some ball players, you know, and Christian Wilkins didn't even practice, so and he's arguably their
yeah,
best
yeah.
the interior defensive lineman. So uh the interior offensive line is gonna like with those younger guys is gonna have some growing pains, but nothing for me to be concerned about.
Okay, that's good to hear. So from joint practice to preseason, it is a difficult transition, I think, for someone who, like you, has been watching the first teams going up against the first teams. Is there anything that you can take away from what you've seen the last couple of days and apply it to what we'll possibly see on Saturday night? And by the way, we're going to do a recap of that game on Saturday. What is it that, if anything, you're taking from this heading into Saturday night's game? Days, I guess.
Yeah,
Your
there's
call.
not really much because I think the I mean, I don't know. It just depends how much the Dolphins are gonna play their starters, but I think the Texans they'll play a lot of their starters. Not too long, but they'll play the majority of their starters. And when that happens, we'll see how they look. And it's gonna be vanilla on both sides. I just want to see good execution, good clean execution, keep the ball moving, keep the operation clean, and go from there. Like I don't need to see CJ throw 3 touchdowns or even play a full half. I mean, to be honest, it'd be good if he did play a full half, but he doesn't need to at this point. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like
It's been
that
resolved.
help him. He said what?
It's been resolved.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't mind him seeing him for a whole half. Could that be better for entertainment purposes? But if he doesn't, he doesn't. But I expect the starting offensive line, the offense, to play a decent amount. I don't know about LT because LT is you don't need to play him.
Laramie Tunsil, right.
You don't need to play Larry Tunsil. Then obviously on defense, the starters will play. How long? Maybe a couple series and maybe 3 series max, and I'll be that.
Glad you mentioned Laramie Tunsil because you posted a couple of videos of Laramie Tunsil just abusing Dolphins defensive linemen.
That I don't think people realize like how I seen someone say like, "Oh, that's a mid pass rusher." Like, bro, Brad Chubb, a 2-time Pro Bowler, like he's gotten double digit
Yeah,
sacks
it was
before in his
Bradley
career.
Chubb
Like,
that he did it to. I
yeah,
saw that and I was
let's
like, "Geez, wait, that's got to be a scrub." Oh, that was Chubb.
yeah, an average offensive tackle couldn't do that to a scrub defensive end coming off the edge, like to block somebody and then use one hand to shield them off
Yeah,
as if
it was
they're
one.
like a child. Come on, what we do? You know, like you can't minimize that. That's a grown man, like 260, 270. You just like, all right, please stop. Thank you. Like, what? Nah, yeah, like that was insane to watch.
I watched The Blind Side for the first time ever last night since it's perhaps current, and they show at the very beginning of the movie the moment in Joe Theismann's career where Lawrence Taylor cracked down on him and obviously broke his leg, and how that's where tackles started getting paid. It's very fortunate that the Texans have a guy like Larry Tunsil out there, and I bet Joe Theismann wishes he had somebody like that. So LT on LT, Lawrence Taylor on Larry Tunsil. Man, I don't know if anyone could have really stopped Lawrence Taylor with the way he was rolling back in the 1980s and early 90s.
I would have given Laramie a shot against Lawrence Taylor.
I want to
I've,
see it.
I've,
Get a
yeah,
time machine.
I've seen Laramie get some of the best in the league, and he holds on. So I would love to see him against arguably the best pass rusher ever. You feel me? I would love to see that. I don't know who would win, so we should just ask the audience who would win and let them figure that out.
It's so funny thinking about Taylor because I also watched the Johnny Manziel documentary this week, and Johnny Manziel, like some of these college games, he was showing up to, he was hungover. Lawrence Taylor was showing up to some of these games in the midst of the bender and still killing everybody out there.
Yeah, man. Yeah, exactly. Like, no, LT was Lawrence Taylor was something crazy, but yeah, no, I would love to see
I
LT
do too.
versus LT, Laramie Tunsil versus Lawrence Taylor, and see who wins in that one. Because um, you know, me, I got my money on my dog LT. So I got money on LT. We'll see though.
I might take the little guy.
Actually, we'll never see, but I would love to see.
I will see. DJ will see at NRG Stadium your beloved Houston Texans taking on the Miami Dolphins. We appreciate everybody joining this. And if you haven't already, we do have this in audio form available wherever you get your podcast. Just search Talkin Texans. If you haven't subscribed to the ESPN Houston YouTube channel already, you should do so. If you're not going to do that, well, you're just not our friend, and we don't like you. And you can follow DJ Bien-Aime on Twitter for all of his work for ESPN. You can find all my stuff as well online at Gallant. Says DJ, it's been fun. Looking forward to actual football game to watch on Saturday. I'll see you out there, bud.
All right, no problem, brother.
So long, farewell, and enjoy your weekend, everybody. Peace.